Hi, my name is Dr. Jeff Noonan. I am a professor of philosophy at the University of Windsor and also the undergraduate coordinator for our department. So whether you will be joining us in September or whether you're still thinking about it, if you have questions about philosophy in general or the department, I'm the person to ask. I'll share my email with you at the end of this discussion, but I did want to spend a few minutes talking about the importance of philosophy in general and its importance in particular in this age of pandemic. If the COVID-19 crisis has taught us anything, it is that the world can change suddenly and unexpectedly, and it can upset our expectations, our ordinary assumptions of what's normal, what we will be doing the next day, what we can expect for the future, our hopes, our plans, our goals. Right? And philosophy has become particularly important in this age because these unexpected changes have forced all of us, whether we're philosophy students or philosophy professors or not, to reassess what is of fundamental importance, to ask what was right about the world before the pandemic, to ask even more importantly what was wrong with it, and to start to think about how we might do things differently in response to this unprecedented, at least in our lifetime, global crisis. And that's what philosophy is, right? Philosophy is the disciplined questioning of what presents itself as normal and natural and true and real. It's more than that. It offers answers. It offers a great variety of answers if we trace the history of philosophy in the Western tradition and other philosophical traditions. But first and foremost, it is a disciplined questioning. Why are things the way they are? Are they the way they ought to be? And if not, how can we make them better? And what does better mean? What standards of assessment will we apply to distinguish the better and the worse? These sorts of questions can't be avoided in a life. Right? Everyone thinks philosophically, although they don't always think they are thinking philosophically. Whenever we pose a why question, right? Whenever we say, that's not right, that's not just, we have to change that. These are philosophical interventions into reality. And what can be more important to a human life than posing those questions? If we don't pose those questions, why? Is it the way it ought to be? How can it be better? We can't change. Right? The struggles going on in the streets around the world right now over racism are rooted in philosophical questions and philosophical arguments. That's not right, what happened to George Floyd. Right? It's wrong. It's unjust. These are philosophical interventions. Now, it's true that simply the question can't solve the problem. But if the question is never posed, the problem is not exposed to the light of day. Right? So we shouldn't think of philosophy as some esoteric practice, right? With big words and complicated arguments and dusty tomes that haven't been taken off library shelves in a century. Philosophy is the ordinary, everyday intervention of real people into the world when they say, why? Why is it the way it is? How could that have been? That's philosophy. But if we're already doing philosophy all the time, why study it? That's a good question. Right? When you drink a glass of water, a whole series of complicated chemical operations take place in the body. Right? You don't need to study chemistry in order to drink water. But if you do study chemistry, you start to learn a lot more about how the body works. So too philosophy. You don't need to study philosophy to pose questions. You simply need to be awake and alive and engaged. But if we begin to look historically and systematically about how different societies justified their form of organization and how different critics pose questions, we can start to pose better questions. And more importantly, we can discover bad answers. Philosophy doesn't decide how the world will be, nor does chemistry or physics. Right? How the human world will be is up to us. What do we decide collectively about how we're going to organize our affairs? Philosophy can't substitute for those types of discussions and deliberations. Nor does philosophy build bridges or grow food. But I think the contribution that philosophy does make, this ability to open up, to expose to questioning, is at least as important as anything else. In fact, I would say if I had more time, and if you come to study with us, you can pursue these questions with me over 4 years or so, right? But I think philosophy underlies all the other disciplines, right? That's not to say that philosophy can tell the chemist what chemistry is all about, or the architect how to design the building. Quite the contrary, right? But philosophy is a comprehensive discipline, right? It gets beneath all of the empirical disciplines as their initial orientation to the world, right? The physicist has to pose philosophical questions. Right? The architect has to pose philosophical questions. Why this building here now? Why is there something rather than nothing in the universe, right? These are philosophical questions. And they connect with science. They connect with artistic and creative practices. But if you study philosophy, right, you'll be refining your ability to question and evaluate the answers of others. And that's of profound practical significance, I think. Right? If you live in Windsor, or if you're going to be moving here, there's a new bridge under construction. It's slowly getting under construction. Right? Now, I'm glad that we have engineers in our engineering department who know how to design bridges. Right? But the job of the engineer is to design the bridge. But we also need people who can ask, do we need this bridge here now? Is this the best approach and solution to transportation problems? That, analogously speaking, is the role of the philosopher. Do we need this here now? What are the grounds of your justification? What if I were to make this argument? How would you respond? In any field of human endeavor, political, artistic, scientific, those sorts of questions need to be raised. And therefore, we need people who can raise them. But we need people who can raise them in a disciplined way. And this is another important aspect of philosophy. Philosophy demands openness to the world, and it demands openness to other people. What do I mean by openness? Right? I think it's easy to get locked into a worldview. And we assume certain things to be correct, and we want them to be correct, and we go around the world looking for things to confirm what we already believe. Now, if those beliefs were absolutely and necessarily true, there would be no problem. But they typically aren't. They typically express one perspective on the world. Might be a very important perspective. But the world contains more. Your values might be very dear to your heart. They might sound like values which are unquestionable, but other people will differ. What do you do when you encounter someone who has a different perspective? Do you eliminate them? Do you tear gas them? Or do you listen to them? Human history is a field of conflict. We don't have to know very much about human history to know that it's a very violent past and present. Philosophy also holds out the hope, perhaps it's naive, I don't think so, but it perhaps is naive, but it holds out the hope that we can listen to each other and resolve differences through argument. Who has the better reason and evidence? We can see in our world today what happens when people stop offering reasons and evidence. Right? Everything is simply a power struggle. And so we see people gathering in huge numbers without masks because they don't believe the people who are saying you should really not gather in large numbers right now, and if you do, you should wear masks. And people don't believe them because they think there's a political agenda. I don't want to harp too much on Donald Trump, but his supporters have ceased to look at evidence about the pandemic and other problems and simply think it's a political tactic of Trump's opponents to undermine. And when we become that closed off to the world and reason and other people, typically very serious and very dangerous social crises ensue. So philosophy holds out the hope that we can listen to each other and make our decisions on the basis of reason and evidence. The reasons and the evidence come from other disciplines, right? Philosophy also connects with all the different empirical ways of knowing. Right? And if you're thinking of studying philosophy, I always encourage, and I was a double major when I was an undergraduate student, I encourage combined honors and double majors, right? And philosophy students over my 20 years at the University of Windsor have combined their philosophy degrees with all sorts of different things. We've had physics and philosophy students, psychology and philosophy students, we've had fine artists and philosophy students, all sorts of different combinations, and they enhance each other, right? But I come back to the absolute importance of people studying philosophy at this moment in history. We are, whatever your politics are, we are at a turning point in this form of society. It cannot continue as it did in the past. Right? People are taking to the streets in huge and inspiring numbers because they can't allow things to go on as they did in the past. But just because people are taking to the streets doesn't mean the problems are solved. Hence again, we need people who are always thinking philosophically about the why and about the direction. And most importantly, who can respectfully engage and criticize others, right? Not simply insisting that I'm right, I'm right, I'm right. Right? Instead of I'm right, you say I argue. I maintain that. And here are my reasons and evidence. And then you listen to what the other side has to say. Now, sometimes you have to fight. But if people were more philosophically disposed towards each other, they could argue. Not in the colloquial sense of argue, which is to scream and yell, but argue in the philosophical sense. Exchange reasons. Here's why I believe what I believe. Why do you believe what you believe? And let's see who has the better argument on their side. So that's the hope, right? Again, maybe it's naive, but we have to at least try to resolve things through dialogue and argument before we resort to more damaging forms of conflict. In any case, that's why I think philosophy is important in general and in particular in this moment in time which we are all sharing. Right? But let me just spend a few minutes talking about the department here, and I will wrap this video up and share my email with you and invite you to contact me at your convenience. We have a small department of 11 members. We are able to offer fairly small classes. You'll get to know us, we'll get to know you. More importantly, you'll get to know your classmates, right? Learning is a social practice. It's not me telling you stuff. If that's what you think learning is, you won't learn anything. If that's what the teacher thinks teaching is, they won't teach very much. So, learning is a social process. You learn by interacting together. Now, if I had my choice, we would be interacting together in a classroom because I think philosophy really demands the face-to-face. but at least for the fall term, we're not going to be able to do that. So we'll have to take second best, which is virtual contact. Nevertheless, we have to gather together and talk and explore, right? That's how all the different sides of a problem are brought to light. I say something, you say something, your classmates say something, and we explore together. We see where the ideas lead us within the framework of that particular class, right? I'm assuming I'm talking to students who will be in their first semester in September. I highly encourage you, whether you want to be a philosophy major or not, that's not the most important thing. The most important thing is to think philosophically. I encourage everyone to take one of our introductory classes, whether that's Phil 1100, Introduction to Western Philosophy, or Phil 1200, Human Nature. It's also an excellent introduction. We offer a class on contemporary moral issues at the 100 level, reasoning skills, which is good for everybody, every student in every discipline, who will be, because it really sharpens your ability to make clear and cogent arguments on your own and detect bad ones or less good ones, let's say, to be more inviting in other people. All of those are excellent, excellent classes to take. Again, whether you want to be a philosophy major or not, right? If you do want to be a philosophy major, you're going to want to get in contact with me. I will help you organize your schedule. If you're coming straight from secondary school, the university is a much bigger institution than your secondary school. It's about 16,000 students, 17,000 students at the University of Windsor. It's a big bureaucratic machine, and it helps to have somebody help you plan your schedule. I was the head of the department for a long time, and every spring, a fourth-year student, a graduating student, or someone who hoped they were graduating would come to me and say, Dr. Noonan, I needed this class. And I'd say, why didn't you talk to me 3 years ago when I could have helped you, right? So I know 4 years is a long time, but stay on top of your degree. Use the resources that the department makes available to help you, and I will be your contact point for those resources. So I very much hope to see, quote unquote, you in the fall. I wish I could meet you. I don't consider computer mediated interactions meeting. Meeting is for real people meeting in physical and not virtual reality. But that will have to wait till the winter, I hope. In any case, for the time being, we will make do. By all means, send me an email. This is my email, jnoonan@uwindsor.ca. Email me at your convenience. I'm happy to answer any of your questions about the university, about the city if you're coming from out of town, about our department, about our course offerings, about philosophy in general, about how you might combine it with another degree. Anything that is concerning to you, send me an email. Again, jnoonan@uwindsor.ca, and welcome to the university and the department, and I look forward to meeting you in person maybe in January.